Ξεκινάω. Χαίρετε. Καλώς ήρθατε στο πάνελ μας μαζί με τον Kevin J. Anderson. Είναι τεράστια τιμή μας που έχουμε το θρυλικό συγγραφέα εδώ. Λίγα λόγια. Έχει περισσότερα από 190 βιβλία στο ενεργητικό του, 58 εκ των οποίων έχουν γίνει best sellers, μεταφρασμένα σε 34 γλώσσες και πάνω από 24 εκατομμύρια αντίτυπα παγκοσμίως. Έχει γράψει μυθιστορήματα για ορισμένα από τα πιο εμβληματικά franchises, όπως Star Wars, Dune, ακόμα και X-Files, καταθέτοντας το δικό του χαρακτήρα σε κόσμους που έχουν μεγαλώσει γενιές αναγνωστών. Παράλληλα, έχει δημιουργήσει και τις δικές του επικές σειρές, όπως το space opera Saga of Seven Suns, τις fantasy τριλογίες Wake the Dragon, Terra Incognita, αλλά και το steampunk project Clockwork Angels, σε συνεργασία με τον Drummelton Rush Neil Part. Kevin, it's great to have you here. It's an honor.
Well, thank you. And you said this was all going to be in English, and I don't know if you just lied to everybody about my credits.
I lied. No. Let's begin. So, I'm going to ask some questions, and then we'll take some questions from the audience, if that's okay with you. You've written in universes like Star Wars, Dune, and the X-Files. What's the biggest challenge in writing with such iconic worlds, and what's the greatest reward?
Well, there are a couple of different challenges. One, you have to be a super fanboy. And I am very much a fanboy of Star Wars. And, I watched Star Wars when it first came out in the movie theaters. So that's how old I am. I was in high school, I think. And I went to see Star Wars, and I didn't know anything about it. It was just a science fiction movie, so I went to see it. And for those of you, it's hard to express how dramatic that movie was. Just from the very beginning, when the words come across the screen, we never saw anything like that before. And then when the blockade runner zips across, and then the Star Destroyer comes, and it keeps coming, and it keeps coming. You've seen it a million times, but the first time we saw it, there was nothing ever like that. We never saw a hairdo like Princess Leia with her pretzels on her ears. The first time that the Millennium Falcon goes into hyperspace, when all the stars start coming at you, well, everybody does that now. Star Trek does that, everything does it, but we never saw that before. And so I was an immediate fan of Star Wars, and I watched every movie when it came out. And so I was completely surprised when Lucasfilm asked me to write. I was the second author that started writing Star Wars books. And I wrote a lot of Star Wars books and comics, and I have a lot of them upstairs in the dealer's room. At the time, The X-Files was a new TV show that was on. Chris Carter, who created The X-Files, read my Star Wars books and said, I really love these. I wonder if he'll write X-Files books. And so he called me up and asked if I would write for The X-Files. So that was pretty cool because I was a fan of the show. But my favorite science fiction book ever was always Frank Herbert's Dune. And after I had written a bunch of Star Wars books and X-Files books and a lot of my own original science fiction, I contacted Frank Herbert's son because Frank had died leaving his Dune stories not finished. They just stopped after his book. And so Brian Herbert and I decided that we would try to finish the story. And we finished it, and we kept writing other books. And we've now done 21 Dune books and lots of comics. I was co-producer on the Dune Part 2 movie with Timothée Chalamet. I have better hair than Timothée Chalamet does. And then the Dune TV show, Dune Prophecy, is based on one of my books that I wrote with Brian Herbert. So, to your question, the hard part is you have to make if you're writing Star Wars or Dune, you have to write a story that feels like Star Wars or feels like Dune. And you can't make mistakes because fans are very particular. Fans will catch you if you make a mistake. And they're always very nice about it, though, so it's...
Usually.
But even though that's hard, the excitement and the joy is so incredible, because I realized that I saw the movie Star Wars and I adored the movie Star Wars, and now I'm writing stories that are part of Star Wars. And I'm writing with Brian Herbert the actual final books in the Dune series that Frank Herbert never wrote. And that makes me feel very happy.
That sounds very nice. And how did your collaboration with Brian Herbert begin? And how do you maintain a balance between honoring his father's legacy and introducing new ideas into the Dune universe?
Well, Brian Herbert and I are like very best friends, and we've been working together for 28 years now. I've been married to my wife for 33 years, so I'm like married to my collaborator too. We have very different backgrounds. I have a physics and astronomy degree, and Brian has a philosophy and comparative religions degree. And Dune has all of those things, so it's good that both of us are working together. And I write using my knowledge, and he writes using his knowledge. But when we're doing a book, we will get together. We live far apart. We live in different parts of the United States. But I will fly up and stay at his house for like 4 or 5 days, and we brainstorm, we make up the story, and we just talk about it all day for day after day until we outline our book. And it might have 100 chapters in it. And there will be chapters about the emperor, and chapters about the Fremen, and chapters about the Bene Gesserit. And we outline it in very great detail. And then we choose our chapters. And Brian might like to write the Bene Gesserit chapters, and I might like to write the Baron Harkonnen chapters. And we split it in half. He writes half of the chapters, and I write half of the chapters. And then we exchange them, and I rewrite all of his chapters, and he rewrites all of my chapters. So by the time we're done, it's both of us have written the whole book. And of course, I don't know how good the Greek translation is, but I know that in English, you can't tell which of us wrote which chapter, because we really polish it very much. And we don't argue at all. We very much work out our problems and keep the books coming.
Now that you mentioned this, the specific elements of Dune, Dune is a deeply philosophical story. Which philosophical level of Dune appeals to you the most? The political allegory, the spiritual journey, the environmental parable, or all of the above?
Well, there are different themes that we like to put in it, and my best skill as a writer is I'm a very good plotter. I like to tell stories, and if you look at the Dune books, they're very complicated. There might be 10 different storylines in it. And it's like playing a master game of chess, moving all the pieces around so that it goes. And I really enjoy tying all these plot stories together. Because of my science background, I like to do the world building, like to create the planet Arrakis, or the planet Caladan, or the planet Giedi Prime. And I enjoy working on that very much. Brian was more interested in like the philosophical and spiritual journey. So we like to say that I will write a very exciting scene about a sandworm attack. And Brian will have characters philosophize about the sandworm attack. So, two different things.
What's the one project that pushed you further out of your comfort zone, and what did you learn from it? Your comfort zone as a writer.
Well, I've written a lot of, not just the media tie-in books, I've written a lot of my original ones. As you said in the introduction to the writing credits, I don't know if the rock group Rush is very popular here in Greece. I know they are in some parts. They are?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, excellent. So that music is very powerful to me. The lyrics in English they just speak to me. They're very philosophical. And it was a Rush album that inspired my very, very first novel more than 40 years ago. And I put in the acknowledgments that I recognized the brilliant lyrics of this album that were written by a man named Neil Peart, who was the drummer for the band. And Neil Peart read my dedication, and he wrote me a letter, and we were friends for over 30 years. And when he asked me if I would work with him on the novel that is based on what was their last album, I was ecstatic, because this is my hero. This is somebody that has inspired me, and he wanted to work with me on this book. But then suddenly I got a panic attack, because I realized that this has to be the best book that I've ever written, because he is so important to me. And I think that those books are some of the best ones that I've done. And alas, they have not been translated into Greek, and it's just, those stories are just really beautiful to me, and I'm very proud of them. And he passed away 5 years ago, and I had to write the third book in that trilogy after he was gone, because we had plotted it together, but I couldn't write it when he was so sick, and I had to wait. But I still think that that's one of my best things. And I think I've written a lot of good books, and that's the best one.
That's so good to hear. I have a lot of questions I can ask you all day, but if you have questions from the audience, yes. Let me just bring you the microphone.
Θα ήθελα να ρωτήσω το εξής. Όταν πέθανε ο πατέρας του Μπράιαν, ο Φρανκ, είχε αφήσει κάποιες κατευθυντήριες γραμμές, υπήρχε κάποιος μπούσουλας, κάποιες σκέψεις, πώς θα εξελιχθεί το Dune?
When Brian's father died, was there any, did he had laid down a map of how he wanted the world to continue in a way?
So Frank Herbert's last books were Heretics of Dune and Chapter House Dune. And that was meant to be a trilogy, 3 books that was going to end the story. He got pancreatic cancer, which is a very fast cancer, that he got very sick very fast. And so he wrote the second, he wrote Chapter House Dune, but then he got very sick with cancer. But he did leave an outline of what he had intended for the last book in the series and how to wrap it up. So we found that outline. I mean, after he had passed away, Brian Herbert did not think about finishing the story, because it's Dune. It's like the giant challenge. It's climbing Mount Olympus. It's trying to do something that important. And it wasn't until 10 years later that I got in touch with him, and he hadn't found the outline, and it was then we started to dig into his notes and the files he left behind, and we found not just the outline for the last book, which was Dune 7 is what we called. We wrote the books, the titles were Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Dune. Those 2 books are what tells the end of the story. But we also found a box with like 1,000 pages of Frank's notes about the Butlerian Jihad and about the Reverend Mother Mohayim and about the Baron Harkonnen's backstory and all those things. So we use those notes to write some of our other books in addition to just Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Dune. So we used Frank's guidance, but we also reread the books over and over again to just see what he had, what clues he had left in there for us.
Yes.
Mr. Anderson, in the beginning of this talk today, you mentioned that you have to be a super fan in order to write in these worlds, etc., because some other fans will find some, point out and react in a very specific way. Has there any time when someone actually reacted in a specific way, in a bad way, and did this happen to you specifically? And if yes, how did you cope with it? And if you have any ideas on why some people tend to react in that way? Thank you.
Well, especially with Dune, because Dune is it's like a passionate book for so many people. It's their favorite book they've ever read. And a lot of people just didn't like the idea that somebody other than Frank Herbert was writing it. Well, to be honest, I wish Frank Herbert was still alive so he could write it. and that's how I wanted to read it. Because of the internet, as you might have noticed on the internet that there might be fan arguments about things. Just little tiny fan arguments.
That never get
That there are some people that can never be satisfied. There are some people who are just wrong. I mean, they'll complain about something, but they're simply not correct. I mean, they're just not right. And there are some small mistakes that we have found over the years that, we used the wrong color for this flag or something like that. But the problem is Frank Herbert made mistakes too. And we've studied these books and we've got like pages of, well, this contradicts that, or this is a mistake that Frank Herbert made. Now, I'm not going to go and say Frank Herbert's a terrible writer because he made those mistakes. I mean, he did it without even computers. I mean, he couldn't go and search for something. But the problem with, the Dune books span something like 20,000 years of history. And as you might have noticed by watching the news, history changes depending on whose news broadcast is coming on or who becomes the next president, that they change what history was. So there is not an absolute fact when you're looking through things, and people make mistakes. And when you get some of the bad fans who react in a very bad way, you just have to realize that 99% of the fans really enjoy it, and so you can't obsess on the one who's probably never going to like it anyway. So I'm proud of the books, and I've done the best that we can, and I know Brian feels the same way.
Επόμενη ερώτηση. Λέια.
Hello. So I'm a big Star Wars fan. And I wanted to ask you, I am also a writer, but I haven't published anything. That's a dream in the future. I wanted to ask how you personally approach writing characters that already exist versus writing your own original characters. When you have a base to go off of, it's very different than writing your own work. And so I just wanted to get your take on that.
Well, especially with Star Wars, I can just watch the movies over and over again. Yeah. And if I'm writing Han Solo, I can see and hear Harrison Ford. And I can see the expressions on his face, and I can hear his voice. And we all know what Han Solo sounds like when he's talking. And we try to come up, it's much harder if there's 50 books written about a character that you have to try to keep track of everything. But when I was first writing Star Wars, I only had the 3 movies, and that was easy for me. In a sense, it's easier as a writer, because if I say in the first sentence of my book that Han Solo and Chewbacca flew the Millennium Falcon to Tatooine, I don't have to explain anything else. You know who Han Solo is, you know who Chewbacca is, you know what the Millennium Falcon looks like, and you know what Tatooine is. But if I say that Captain Anton and Lady Jane flew the Rocket 1 to Melgameth, you don't know who any of those characters are. You don't know what the place is. So then my job as a writer is, as quickly as I can, I have to introduce you to everything. When I write in Star Wars, it's like a shorthand process, because you've already met those characters. Of course, Lucasfilm keeps almost all the money when I write one of those books, and I keep the money when I write my own books. So I would like for one of my characters to be as popular as Han Solo, so I'm working on that.
Επόμενη ερώτηση. Έχουμε κάτι? Okay. Έχουμε εκεί? The back. Yeah. We got 2 of them. No worries. Let's start with the lady, and then we go to the gentleman.
Greetings. I want to ask you, as a writer, about Dune, because when we speak about Dune, we imagine the warm battles and the spaceships and stuff, but I want to emphasize on the political drama and religious drama that is going on, that is more apparent in the series about Bene Gesserit. Did you study anything around sociology and stuff, or political stuff, in order to write this political aspect of the book? Or did you go with the flow, got inspired by other movies and stuff?
Well, I'm very fascinated by the political aspects and the economic aspects, and the Bene Gesserit, they are the most important, powerful group in the entire series. If you read Frank Herbert's books, they are the ones running everything all the way through. And one of the things that they do so well is they quietly manipulate the power so that people aren't like bombastically saying, I'm the one in charge. They're just sort of secretly making the men do what they want to do, as women do. So I loved the fact that they were the ones that have the long, subtle, they have the breeding plan, and when we wrote the Butlerian Jihad trilogy and then the Sisterhood books, we loved to show that this is a group that has the patience and this long-term plan that will span thousands of years, but they have this overall picture, whereas I get frustrated when people can't plan more than 2 days ahead of time. And we loved building out the sociology and the politics of how they manipulate things. And I mean, it's not, this is an interesting thing that Frank Herbert did, is that the women in the Bene Gesserit use all kinds of different feminine skills, not just sex to get what they want, which many other writers would have just had them be seductresses that would sleep with a man and that would take care of it, which is what usually happens anyway. But they were much more subtle and much more intelligent. And you have to remember, when Frank Herbert wrote that book in 1963, there were almost no strong female characters in the entire genre of science fiction. Lady Jessica was perhaps the first strong female character ever written in science fiction. Before that, it was just some beautiful lab assistant saying, "Oh, doctor, to explain things to me." So Frank was a very strong feminist and very descriptive in how he thought the feminine wisdom was different from sort of the powerful male wisdom, that he thought that power could be subtle instead of just hitting things. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you. Next question. Ο κύριος πίσω είχε μια ερώτηση. Don't worry, θα στο πάρουμε.
Building on the last question, because Dune came out before Star Wars, and Star Wars was, like you said, nothing was like it before, and it was the sort of escapist pulp fantasy in the midst of 70s grit and drama. But Dune was a dark book, and it's a political book. It's not a happy-go-lucky book like Star Wars is. I know Star Wars got darker and more complex, but originally it's a bit more like a fairy tale. So when you're required then in a post-Star Wars world to write Dune books, how do you sort of reckon with this new identity? Because when Star Wars came out, I think Frank Herbert wanted to sue George Lucas exactly because he thought he stole a lot of stuff. And there's also, John Carter, which is even older than Dune, and it's even more, pulp escapist fantasy than Star Wars. So how do you sort of balance writing, Star Wars, which is one thing, and Dune, which is another thing in terms of tone?
Well, the question is about, there are quite substantial differences between Star Wars and Dune, as far as Star Wars is more escapist science fantasy, whereas Dune was a much richer, hard science fiction and political and sociological. And yes, I'm aware that Frank Herbert was not happy with Star Wars. And in fact, Brian Herbert and I have had many discussions because I've written a lot of Star Wars and I've written Dune with him. And it's pretty clear that George Lucas was influenced by Dune, with just the planet Tatooine, the Sarlacc and the pit is just like a sandworm. But not just that, it's the Jedi Knights are very much like the Bene Gesserit in certain ways. But in writing both of them, see, I loved Star Wars, and I kind of graduated into Dune as well. And I think that telling stories for colorful, sense of wonder entertainment, which is what Star Wars is, that serves a very good purpose. But Dune is deeper than that, and I'm sorry if this is sacrilege, but Frank Herbert, in some of his later Dune books, got so deep into the philosophical complexity that so many people stopped reading them because they weren't getting an entertaining story anymore. And I think that to be successful as a writer, you want to be able to put in the deep philosophical things, the political things, the sociological ideas, but you have to tell a good enough story that people will actually read them. And I think that I brought some of my Star Wars skills into our Dune books because they are more colorful and faster paced than especially Frank's last couple of Dune books. But they still do have the deep philosophy and the religion and the ecological and political things in them. So I like to think that they can be enjoyed by both sides of the audience. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, I have a second question, if I'm not, overstepping. How does that reflect in the Dune film? Because that was a disappointment I sort of had when I watched it, because Villeneuve is a very good director, but his take on Dune isn't that dissimilar to like a Star Wars movie or even like Avatar by Cameron. So, I don't know, I want your opinion on that more than anything. I don't expect a full answer.
I'm not sure I got.
Could you please repeat the question? Because
When I saw the Dune film, I think that Villeneuve was a bit too influenced from Star Wars because, you know, everyone is influenced by Star Wars.
was a little bit too influenced from Star Wars. The director was a bit.
The new movies?
Yes, yeah.
Oh. Well, maybe, but he's also making a movie for today's audience instead of the 1963 when Frank wrote the book. Frank kind of liked even the David Lynch movie, although there are lots of problems with the David Lynch movie in 1984. It doesn't follow the book very closely, and when Paul makes it rain at the end, and it's rain in the desert, which now we know would kill all of the sandworms, but I think that Villeneuve still managed to capture like the texture and the feel, and he brought the real culture of the Fremen onto the screen in a way that the previous versions of the movie, and there was the Sci-Fi Channel miniseries too. It was his own take, and I think that it was much more closely followed the novel than either of the previous ones did. And to me, the best part is that because of those movies, and even because of the David Lynch movie, millions of more readers are reading Frank Herbert's original book. And so I think that that's a much better thing.
Thank you.
Over here for the gentleman with the green shirt.
Hello. My question is, what are your influences as a writer? You mentioned that you watched the first Star Wars movie as a young man, but what are your influences as a writer, sci-fi or not?
Well, also, reading the book Dune influenced my writing a great deal. And in fact, I'll tell you a story, because I read all of Frank Herbert's books, not just Dune, but he wrote a lot of books that were nothing to do with Dune. He wrote other science fiction books, and I read all of them, and I studied how he wrote, and I really was influenced by his writing. And when I sold my first novel, it was called Resurrection, Inc. I sold my first novel. I was able to join the Science Fiction Writers of America, which is our professional organization, because I had sold a book. And because I was a member of the Science Fiction Writers of America, I got their membership directory, which had Frank Herbert's home address in it. And I made up my mind that I was going to send Frank Herbert an autographed copy of my first novel to thank him for being such an inspiration. And he passed away before my book was published. So I was not able to send him one. But that first book was also, as I mentioned, inspired by this album by the rock group Rush. And all of their music has inspired a lot of my stories. And again, then I got to work with the guy who wrote the songs that inspired so much of it. As a reader right now, I don't read very much science fiction because I work in science fiction, and the thing I like to read is more mysteries and thrillers, just because when I read a science fiction book, it's almost like analyzing something I know already, so I don't get any entertainment out of it. But when I read a good thriller, I don't write thrillers, so I can pay attention to that. I'm here in Thessaloniki. I was in Bulgaria last year. I was in Belgium last year. I am going to Poland next month. I'm going to Dubai in September. I'm going to Denmark in November. I get a lot of inspiration because I like seeing new cultures, traveling to different places, meeting different people, eating really good Greek food. I think that as a writer, you should try to experience many different things so that you can draw on that when you're writing. And that's where I also get a lot of inspiration. I was very surprised to learn that you all know the great classic French writer Jules Verne. He traveled 20,000 leagues under the sea and 5 weeks in a balloon and The Mysterious Island and all of these epic adventures where the characters travel around the world and they do all these amazing things. And I was surprised to learn that Jules Verne never even left France. He didn't like to travel. He didn't go anywhere. He just would read about it in books and then make up his stories. I would much rather be in a place so that I can see your ruins. I can see Mount Olympus. This morning I saw Mount Olympus for the first time because the last 3 days there was fog and I couldn't see it across the bay. And so I was very excited about seeing that. I think as a writer, the more things like that gives me the ingredients to write more and more stories. And of course, I don't want to go into some of the bad, terrible adventures that my characters go through, because I don't want to be uncomfortable at any point, but I do like to see new things.
Next question. Εδώ πέρα. Στη φίλη με την λυσίδα.
Hello, thank you for your time. I am a character artist mostly, but I am trying to write as well. And what I usually find difficulty with is, we talked about plotting earlier. So whenever I try to develop a character, I get very caught up on the psychology and the dimensions of the character, and then I just cannot find any events that will create a conflict. I do find some, but I just don't find them good enough. So I wanted to ask, like, how does that look like from your point of view? Like, what is the process that you usually go through and the questions that you ask yourselves?
Well, to me, it's all very interconnected. So say I'm going to write, it's different if I'm writing in Star Wars because I know what the planets are and they're already predefined. I know what the characters are, I know what a lightsaber is and all that. So let's set that aside. So I'm gonna write just a brand new science fiction series with 2 alien races at war and Earth gets caught up in the middle of it. I go in 3 different directions. I try to come up with the characters I want to use, and I almost never write a book that just has one main character. I like to have 10 or all different characters. So I think about who some of these characters are going to be. But then I also start thinking of like scenes, like the big battle at the end, a space battle, or whether it's Ewoks down in the trees fighting with the stormtroopers. And there will be some ideas that I'll have of, I want to battle with sea monsters and spaceships, and I want to have somebody stranded on an asteroid, and I come up with these story parts of the ideas. And then the third part is when I do what I call is world building, where I try to describe, okay, so what are these alien races and what are the planets that they live on and what is their political structure? Like say one of the alien races are like insects, so it's like a hive and different drones. And then the other race is more like humans, so they have individual personalities. And as I start to develop the culture of these aliens, then I think of ideas that, oh, I've got to put that as part of the story. And then I think, oh, well, maybe this character I'm thinking of can be the one stranded on the asteroid. And so it kind of grows in this direction, and it grows in this direction, and it grows in that direction. and pretty soon I have a 500-page book that I've written. But I always like to plot and plan everything very much ahead of time. I don't like to just start writing and see where it goes, because then you have to throw away a lot of that and fix it. And I really don't like throwing away stuff that I worked hard to write. So did that help? No?
Yes.
Not at all.
Well, it did. It gave me some ideas. But regarding how the multiple characters clash, like depending on their character traits and dimensions, that's where I'm lost usually.
Well, to me, it sounds almost like you're spending all of your time on the characters and not spending time on your story and the world building. And you know, if characters are thrown into a situation, they will have to react according to who they are. And so get a good idea of who the characters are, but then start putting them into their roles so that they have to do something. And then you will get to understand them better. And you know, if they're stuck on a spaceship that's running out of air, they have to do something. They can't just argue over their different philosophical points.
That was very helpful. Yeah, thank you. I got it.
I think we have time for one or two questions. So let's do a first question by somebody that hasn't sent. Thank you. We probably have time for one more, but let's be safe.
So from editors to higher-ups, especially when writing for a big franchise, you're probably asked to make a lot of compromises to your stories. Which compromises do you choose to, where do you choose not to compromise? And plot points or characters you're willing to stick up for? And what do you choose to kind of give into?
That's a really interesting question, because the question was, when you're writing for different franchises, that you might have to make various compromises because of the owners of the intellectual property. It often depends on who the property owners are. Sometimes they can be very reasonable and easy to work with, and sometimes they're just like dictators and very absolute. I was fortunate because I started with Lucasfilm and Star Wars very early on, so they were very flexible. They didn't have a lot of things set down, and they let me do pretty much anything. Because I was true to the franchise. I mean, I watched Star Wars so much that I didn't ask to do something that Luke Skywalker would never do. So that wasn't so hard. But there were times that I had to completely scrap what I thought was a really good idea because they were making a toy that they were contradicting it. You don't have any choice in that case because they are the final owner. It's their children and I'm just the babysitter. Working for the X-Files was very difficult because I was writing the books while they were making weekly episodes of the TV show, and they were changing their minds every single week. And it takes longer than a week to write a book. So I would be all the way down writing this, and then they said, well, no, we don't want you to include the lone gunman anymore. So then I'd have to rewrite and take that whole thing out. I never got to the point where I had to say, I refuse to do this and you're going to have to fire me. Because when you take on work like that, you know that you are working with somebody else's toys, that you have to do what they want. And I was usually in a good enough position that if I felt strongly about something, I could make my case and argue it. And almost always I would convince them. and I could usually like quote something from the movie to like, well, no, your movie says this, and then they realized that I knew the movie better than they did, and then they let me. But if you really don't want to make any compromises, then you need to write your own original book instead of working for somebody else. So.
Μία ακόμα. Yeah. Σας περνώ το μικρόφωνο. Δεν έχει σημασία. She asked you what is your opinion on the use of AI and how's this affected your work?
A lot of writers.
It's a short question because we have like 3 minutes.
Okay. Well, a lot of writers really hate AI and they're having a revolution against it. I have used it as a tool for, I dictate my stories into a tape recorder and AI will transcribe it for me. I don't ever have AI write my books for me because that's the fun part. Why would I want AI to do that? But I think that the writers and artists who are like at war with AI, like we hate it, it's like somebody saying that they don't like DVDs because they prefer VHS tapes. AI is here. You cannot, it's gonna be here. You have to deal with it. So I would rather figure out how to use it rather than just say I don't want to use it because it's here. You can't say no. And maybe she can ask her question. I'll answer. The woman behind her has a question.
One. We have a little.
I'll answer fast.
Yes, thank you.
So, since you are in both titans of sci-fi movies, Star Wars and Dune, my question is a bit controversial because I think I may offend some fans of some characters, but how to write a character like Lady Jessica and avoid characters like Rey? I know some people might be fans of Rey, but I find Rey a bit of superficial, though I can see her conflict, her pain, especially with her parents and the whole Palpatine thing. So, what's your take on it? What would you suggest?
Well, the character is the character. I mean, and I choose to write about strong women characters rather than like weak characters because those aren't interesting to me. And as a writer, you get to choose who you tell a story about. And I like to choose characters that I can admire. And if it's a weak and passive character, they can't have an interesting story. I will have those characters, but then I'll have a monster eat them. So I think we're at an end. I just want to mention, so I'm upstairs with the comic artists and I have a bunch of my books there. So if you want to talk and ask questions, I'll be here for another hour before the hall closes. And I'm here tomorrow too.
Thank you very much, Kevin J. Anderson. It was an honor. Thank you all. Στη συνέχεια έχουμε Q&A session με τον Μάσιμο Ντεβίτα. Ο Ντάρικ Ρόμπερτσον δεν αισθάνεται καλά και δεν θα το κάνει το προγραμματισμένο Q&A. Οπότε μείνετε συντονισμένοι για έναν Disney μαέστρο και μια συνομιλία μαζί του. Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Λόγω κάποιων τεχνικών δυσκολιών, εν πάση περιπτώσει, θα αργήσει λίγο να είναι μαζί μας. Επομένως, θα ξεκινήσουμε εμείς την παρουσίαση για όσους ενδεχομένως δεν γνωρίζουν επακριβώς την πορεία και το έργο του. Και σύντομα θα τον έχουμε κοντά μας για να τον ανακρίνουμε τόσο εμείς όσο και εσείς με τις ερωτήσεις σας από το κοινό. Επομένως, ο λόγος στον Γιώργο Ζωητά, ο οποίος θα μας πει μερικά πράγματα για τη ζωή και το έργο του μεγάλου Ιταλού καλλιτέχνη Μάσιμο ντε Βίτα.
Γεια σας και από μένα. Είναι λίγο δύσκολες. Λοιπόν, να πούμε δύο λογάκια για τον Μάσιμο ντε Βίτα. Ο Μάσιμο ντε Βίτα είναι από τους σημαντικότερους Disney σχεδιαστές που έχουν περάσει, όχι μόνο που έχουμε δει στην Ελλάδα, γενικότερα, νομίζω στο παγκόσμιο στίβο. Είναι γιος του Πιέρ Λορέντζο ντε Βίτα, ο οποίος δεν θυμάμαι αν είχαμε δει ιστορίες του στην Ελλάδα, πρέπει να είχαμε δει. Όχι, δεν αναφέρομαι μόνο για... Θα το κάνουμε και λίγο διάλογο τώρα, στυλ. Δεν λέω μόνο για Disney. Disney ιστορίες του πατέρα του Μάσιμο ντε Βίτα, του Πιέρ Λορέντζο, σίγουρα είχαμε δει κάποιες. Δεν θυμάμαι αν είχαμε δει και τις πιο ρεαλιστικές που είχε κάνει, που ήταν σε στυλ αμερικάνικων ιστοριών.
Πιθανώς να έχουμε δει κανένα ζωρό, αλλά δεν είμαι τώρα διαβασμένος για να απαντήσω σε αυτό. Ωστόσο, ναι, έκανε και ρεαλιστικά κόμιξ πέρα από τα Disney κόμιξ που έκανε. Ο Πιέρ Λορέντζο ντε Βίτα, ο μπαμπάς του Μάσιμο.
Και αυτές ήταν κυρίως σε αμερικάνικο στυλ. Και ο Μάσιμο ντε Βίτα ακολούθησε σε αυτό το στυλ του μπαμπά. Τέλος πάντων, από εκεί πέρα πήρε το μικρόβιο και ξεκίνησε να φτιάχνει και αυτός ιστορίες με Disney χαρακτήρες. Μερικούς από τους πιο γνωστούς χαρακτήρες που έχει κάνει είναι ουσιαστικά ο θεμελιωτής των προσωπικότητων του Phantom Duck και του Μάσιμο ντε Βίτα, του Indiana Goofy. Αλλά έχει κάνει και ιστορίες και με πάπια και ποντίκια, που είναι πολύ χαρακτηριστικό, γιατί συνήθως όποτε ένας δημιουργός κάνει ιστορίες, μπορεί να κάνει μόνο με τον Μίκη ή μόνο με τον Ντόναλντ ή μόνο με το παπιά Λιμνούπολη. Ο Μάσιμο ντε Βίτα έκανε σχέδιο μεν, όχι σενάριο, έχει κάνει και όχι σενάρια, αλλά κυρίως σχέδιο, αλλά και πάλι είναι δύσκολο. Και ήταν και αυτό δείγμα του πόσο καλός ήταν.
Και για να συμπληρώσω την κουβέντα του Γιώργου, όσο ό,τι αφορά το ότι υπήρξε θεμελιωτής των χαρακτήρων Phantom Duck και Indiana Goofy, που στην Ελλάδα οι ιστορίες τους δημοσιεύονταν κατά βάση στο περιοδικό Αλμανάκο, σημαίνει ότι παρόλο που δεν ήταν ο ίδιος ο δημιουργός τους, δηλαδή οι δύο ήρωες αυτοί είχαν δημιουργηθεί από άλλους και σεναριογράφους και σχεδιαστές, πολύ σύντομα ο Μάσιμο ντε Βίτα ανέλαβε το σχέδιο των ιστοριών αυτών των ηρώων, με αποτέλεσμα πολλοί κιόλας να θεωρούν ότι είναι δική του, ότι είναι αυτός ο δημιουργός τους, ιδίως για τον Indiana Goofy, δεδομένου ότι έχει σχεδιάσει την πλειοψηφία των πρώτων ιστοριών των δύο αυτών εμβληματικών χαρακτήρων της δυσνεϊκής ιταλικής παραγωγής.
Και δεν είναι μόνο αυτό, είναι ότι πολλές φορές γράφεται ότι το σενάριο το έχει κάνει ο τάδε, το σχέδιο το έχει κάνει ο τάδε. Δεν είναι απόλυτες αυτές οι έννοιες. Δηλαδή ότι ο σεναριογράφος μπορεί να μην έχει ακριβώς δώσει το στυλ που θέλει και να το δίνει ο σχεδιαστής. Ή αντίστοιχα ο σεναριογράφος να έχει ιδέες τις οποίες να περνάει στο σχεδιαστή. Και πολλές φορές αλληλοσυνδέονται αυτές οι έννοιες και ο Μάσιμο ντε Βίτα, ακόμα και όταν έκανε μόνο το σχέδιο, πέρναγε το δικό του στυλ και ήταν πολύ χαρακτηριστικό σε αυτό που έκανε. Τα περιοδικά, ποια είπαμε, στο Αλμανάκο. Το Αλμανάκο έχει μπει, ναι, στο Αλμανάκο έχουμε δει σίγουρα. Έχουμε δει και στο Mickey Mouse και στα κλασικά. Και στο κόμιξ, ναι, στο κόμιξ είχε μία ιστορία που ήταν συνέχεια της ιστορίας του Καρλ Μπάρξ με τη χρυσή περικεφαλαία, που έδειχνε, να το πούμε γι' αυτό, ωραία, αφού το φτάσαμε. Στο κόμιξ 100 υπήρχε η χρυσή περικεφαλαία του Καρλ Μπάρξ, που ήταν ότι η υπόθεση ότι όποιος βρει αυτή την χρυσή περικεφαλαία θα γίνει ο αυτοκράτορας της Αμερικής. Και όλοι ψάχνανε αυτή την περικεφαλαία και έδειχνε το πώς τους έτρωγε η φιλοδοξία και το ένα και το άλλο. Και ο Μάσιμο ντε Βίτα είχε εικονογραφήσει μια ιστορία που ήταν συνέχεια αυτής της ιστορίας με αυτούς τους δημιουργούς, που είναι και αυτό πάλι ιδιαίτερη περίπτωση. Επειδή ο Μάσιμο ντε Βίτα είναι Ιταλός και ο Καρλ Μπάρξ είναι Αμερικάνος. Εδώ όμως βλέπουμε ότι φτιάχτηκε μια ιστορία από Ιταλούς που είναι συνέχεια της Αμερικάνικης. Και παρόλα αυτά χρησιμοποίησε όλους τους χαρακτήρες, κράτησε όλη την προσωπικότητα των χαρακτήρων, επέκτηνε την ιστορία και το κατάφερε νομίζω πολύ καλά.
Και ένα ενδιαφέρον στοιχείο αυτής της συνέχειας είναι το γεγονός ότι ενώ ο Καρλ Μπάρξ σχεδίαζε σχεδόν αποκλειστικά ιστορίες με παπιά και η συγκεκριμένη ιστορία Χρυσή Περικεφαλαία είχε πρωταγωνιστές τον Ντόναλντ και τα ανιψάκια, ο Μάσιμο ντε Βίτα επέλεξε να αλλάξει το πλαίσιο και να τοποθετήσει την ιστορία του στο Mickey City και να πρωταγωνιστεί ουσιαστικά να είναι ο Γκούφι, ο ξάδερφος του Όλαφ, αν θυμάμαι σωστά. Η Ρίστο εν παρόδο, ο Γκούφι ήταν ένας από τους αγαπημένους ήρωες του Μάσιμο ντε Βίτα, γι' αυτό και σχεδίασε και πολλές ιστορίες με τις παραλλαγμένες εκδοχές του ήρωα, όπως ο Ινδιάνα Γκούφι ή και ο Σούπερ Γκούφι, που επίσης είδαμε πολλές ιστορίες του στο Αλμανάκο, ή του έδωσε και σχεδόν πρωταγωνιστικό ρόλο στο Σπαθί των Πάγων, που είναι ένα από τα πιο εμβληματικά έργα του, για το οποίο θα σας πει δύο λόγια ούτως ή άλλως και ο Γιώργος.
Αυτό εδώ, έχουμε εδώ. Αυτή εδώ παίρνει ανατύπωση που είχε βγει στα μεγάλα σύριαλ. Να πούμε γι' αυτό, ότι τα μεγάλα σύριαλ ήταν είτε συλλογές από ιστορίες που είχαν μπει στο Mickey Mouse, είτε αυτόνομες ιστορίες που δεν είχαν μπει κάπου αλλού, αλλά ήταν, με λίγα λόγια, ολοκληρωμένες μεγάλες αυτοτελείς ιστορίες. Και εδώ είδαμε και αρκετές ιστορίες του Μάσιμο ντε Βίτα, είτε αυτόνομες, είτε σε συλλογή. Αυτή η ιστορία έχει να κάνει με μάγους, με εξωτικά, με σκανδιναβική μυθολογία. Να δούμε και εδώ πέρα και κάποιες λίγες σελίδες, όσο τα λέμε. Εδώ πέρα βλέπουμε ότι ο Γκούφι είναι σε ρόλο... Λοιπόν, ένα. Ναι. Ο Γκούφι συνήθως είναι συμπρωταγωνιστής και μερικές φορές ούτε καν. Είναι β' ρόλος, γ' ρόλος μερικές φορές. Ναι, comic relief. Και εδώ πέρα, στο Σπαθί των Πάγων, βλέπουμε ότι γίνεται πρωταγωνιστής. Και συνήθως όταν γίνεται αυτό, όταν είναι πρωταγωνιστής ο Γκούφι, σημαίνει ότι λείπει ο Μίκι. Γιατί αν ήταν ο Μίκι θα τον είχε επισκιάσει. Εδώ υπάρχει ο Μίκι και βλέπουμε ότι ο Γκούφι όχι μόνο είναι ο πρωταγωνιστής, όλοι πιστεύουν και ότι ο Γκούφι είναι ο πρωταγωνιστής. Και αυτό το κάνει και με ένα ωραίο τέχνασμα, επειδή ταξιδεύουν σε αυτόν τον φανταστικό κόσμο και υπήρχε ένας θρύλος ότι θα έρθει ο Αλφ και θα τους σώσει όλους, ο οποίος είναι πάλι πνευσμένος από την σκανδιναβική μυθολογία. Και βλέπουν τον πιο ψηλό. Ο πιο ψηλός είναι ο Γκούφι. Και επειδή αυτοί οι χαρακτήρες δεν έχουν επαφή με τον Γκούφι, είναι νέοι χαρακτήρες, είναι λογικό για αυτούς να νομίζουν ότι ο Γκούφι είναι ο πρωταγωνιστής. Άρα έτσι καταφέρνει επίτεχνα να κάνει τον χαζούλη της παρέας εντός εισαγωγικών πρωταγωνιστή. Και αυτό είναι μια ωραία ιδέα, την οποία όμως την χτίζει και καλά. Γιατί μια ωραία ιδέα, αν δεν την εκτελέσει καλά, δεν έχει καλό αποτέλεσμα. Εδώ πέρα βλέπουμε ότι είχε και την ιδέα και την εκτέλεση. Αυτά εδώ είναι σκηνικά από την τέταρτη ιστορία, που δεν είχε δημοσιευτεί. Όχι τον τίτλο, θυμάμαι προς αυτό. Η ωραία κοιμωμένη του κόσμου των άστρων, κάπως, ή των άστρων, ή η ωραία κοιμωμένη των άστρων ή των κόσμων. Εδώ, αυτό είχε δημοσιευτεί σε 3 μέρη. Είχαμε δει τα 3 μέρη στα ελληνικά, αλλά αρκετά χρόνια αργότερα δημοσιεύτηκε στην Ιταλία ένα 4ο μέρος, το οποίο δεν το είδαμε, δυστυχώς, στην Ελλάδα. Αυτά είναι κάποια spoiler σκηνικά από το 4ο μέρος του Σπαθιού των Πάγων. Εδώ πέρα να δούμε κάποια παραδείγματα. Δεν ξέρω αν υπάρχει περίπτωση να το δούμε κάποια στιγμή στην Ελλάδα. Προσωπικά θα ήθελα να τη δω σε οποιοδήποτε περιοδικό. Και εδώ είναι μερικά παραδείγματα από τον Ινδιάνα Γκούφι που βλέπουμε. Αυτό είναι χαρακτηριστικό στυλ που υπήρχε στο Αλμανάκο, το διαβάζαμε συνήθως. Ήταν πολύ χαρακτηριστικές ιστορίες με την Τζιμπάρα και τον Δόκτωρα Χλαπάτσα, που έμπαιναν κυρίως στη δεκαετία του 90, νομίζω, στο Αλμανάκο. Περίπου, ναι. Εδώ πέρα είναι μια άλλη ωραία ιστορία, που και αυτή νομίζω δεν πρέπει να έχει δημοσιευτεί στην Ελλάδα, αν κάνω λάθος. Παρουσιάζουν τον Μίκη και τον Γκούφι που ταξιδεύουν στο παρελθόν και ζουν ιστορικές σκηνές με βάση την κανονική ιστορία που έχει υπάρξει, αλλά με χιουμοριστική προσέγγιση.
Να υποδεχτούμε στην παρέα μας τον Ιταλό καλλιτέχνη.
Γεια σας, φίλοι μου.
Και μετά θα περάσουμε το λόγο στο κοινό. Οπότε...
Νομίζω η καλύτερη πάσα που έχουμε είναι ότι δεν ξέρω αν το παρατηρήσατε. Ο Μάσιμο μιλάει στα ελληνικά, εντάξει. Νομίζω όμως σε πολύ καλό βαθμό. Καταλάβαμε όλοι τι εννοεί. Και τώρα θα αναρωτιέστε γιατί. Και νομίζω εδώ είναι μια καλή ευκαιρία να ρωτήσουμε τι γίνεται.
Sono curiosi come mai tu puoi parlare in greco, allora vogliamo tu ci spieghi il tuo rapporto con Grecia.
Raccontagli che...
No,
okay, vabbè. Raccontagli che sono 40 anni che noi veniamo, io e mia moglie, a Petra, e che veniamo in Grecia e te racconti quello che sai tu, perché non c'è bisogno che te lo dico io.
Va bene.
Abbiamo l'amore per la Grecia, abbiamo conosciuto tutte le isole, tutto il Peloponneso. Creta conosciamo, cosa che tu non conoscevi. Vabbè, dai,
μου είπε γενικά πέρα από τα λίγα πράγματα που μου ανέφερε τώρα ότι μπορώ να μοιραστώ κι εγώ όσα γνωρίζω ήδη από τις κουβέντες που έχουμε κάνει για τις σχέσεις του με την Ελλάδα. Είναι περισσότερα από 40 χρόνια που επισκέπτονται την Ελλάδα με την σύζυγό του και τον γιο τους, ερχόμενοι για διακοπές σχεδόν κάθε καλοκαίρι. Διακοπές. Καθόντουσαν μερικές φορές και 3 μήνες το καλοκαίρι. Ο Μάσιμο για πολλά χρόνια είχε ένα φουσκωτό αραγμένο μόνιμα στη Σκιάθο που ερχόταν το καλοκαίρι και τον περίμενε για να περιηγηθεί σε διάφορα μέρη στις Ποράδες, αλλά όχι μόνο. Αργότερα το φουσκωτό αντικαταστάθηκε από ένα ιστιοπλοϊκό, με το οποίο γύρισαν επίσης πολλά μέρη του Αιγαίου και όχι μόνο. Και μία από τις πολύ ιδιαίτερες εμπειρίες του Μάσιμο στην Ελλάδα ήταν η επαφή του με το Άγιον Όρος και συγκεκριμένα με το νησί, πώς το λέγανε, το νησί. Κύρα Παναγιά, την Κύρα Παναγιά, για το οποίο έχει ενδιαφέρον να μιλήσουμε στη συνέχεια. Υπάρχει πιθανότητα αύριο να εκθέσουμε και μερικές σελίδες της ιστορίας στον τοίχο, που αυτή τη στιγμή υπάρχουν τα καβαλέτα με μερικά έργα του Μάσιμο. Πρόκειται για μια ιστορία, την οποία, απόσπασμα της οποίας τώρα θα δείξει ο Γιώργος στο προβολέα. Πρόκειται για την ιστορία από την σειρά ιστοριών με τον επιθεωρητή... με τον Σερ Μίκη, ναι, τα ημερολόγια του Σερ Μίκη, η οποία δραματίζεται στα μετέωρα. Ωστόσο, η έμπνευση της ιστορίας και ένας χαρακτήρας συγκεκριμένα από την ιστορία είναι εμπνευσμένος από έναν μοναχό που είχε γνωρίσει ο Μάσιμος στην Κύρα Παναγιά, στο Άγιον Όρος, και θα ήθελα να μας πει μερικά παραπάνω λόγια γι' αυτό.
dato anche la sua saggezza in tutti questi anni, perché noi ogni anno eravamo da lui una settimana, 10 giorni. C'è stato una volta nel 79, ecco, nel 79 siamo rimasti 20 giorni perché c'era un Meltemi, non potevi scappare, e lui ci ha ospitato per 20 giorni in questo monastero, che era solo, lui era, come si dice?
Il responsabile.
Sì, il responsabile del monastero, del santuario, che era Παναγιά, santuario.
Ο Πάτερ Νεκτάριος ήταν δεν μου έρχεται η θρησκευτική ορολογία, ο υπεύθυνος, εν πάση περιπτώσει, πέραν αυτού, του μοναστηριού της Κύρα Παναγιάς, τον οποίο γνώρισε σε ένα από τα ταξίδια του στο νησί, και από τότε αναπτύχθηκε μια πολύ ιδιαίτερη σχέση ανάμεσά τους, με αποτέλεσμα να τον αποκαλεί τον πνευματικό του πατέρα, ο οποίος πέρα από την φιλία του μοιράστηκε μαζί του και την σοφία του, και κάθε χρόνο, όποτε γυρνούσαν στις σποράδες, φρόντιζαν να τον επισκέπτονται κάποιες φορές για 2-3 μέρες, άλλες φορές για 5, μια εβδομάδα, 10, μέχρι που μια φορά αναφέρει ένα συγκεκριμένο σκηνικό που λόγω ενός μελτεμιού που δεν τους επέτρεπε να επιστρέψουν στην Σκιάθο, χρειάστηκε να μείνουν εκεί για 20 μέρες.
Spiegagli che io scrivendo e disegnando questa storia non è che ho voluto offendere il pater. Per me è un omaggio, perché la storia è da ridere, però è stato un omaggio per il mio amore per lui, per quello che mi ha dato.
Σε ό,τι αφορά τώρα τη συγκεκριμένη ιστορία, παρόλο που γυρίζεται, που είναι τοποθετημένη στα μετέωρα, υπάρχει ένας μοναχός, τον οποίον σαρκώνει ο Γκούφι, έχουμε κάποια εικόνα, ο οποίος στα ελληνικά μεταφράστηκε ως Γκουφόδουλος, αλλά στα ιταλικά το όνομά του ήταν...
Ecco, se voi guardate i particolari, metti su,
Sì, sì.
lui c'è questo piede,
Dammi un momento per spiegare la prima parte. Sì, sì, sì.
Allora, lascia così.
Ο οποίος στα ιταλικά η ονομασία του ήταν Πάτερ Πιπάριους. Πίπο είναι το όνομα του Γκούφι στα ιταλικά, οπότε είχε αυτό το παιχνίδι, το λογοπαίγνιο με τον Νεκτάριο. Και αυτό που εξηγεί είναι ότι ο συγκεκριμένος χαρακτήρας, ενώ συνήθως σε τέτοιου τύπου διασκευές ουσιαστικά πρόκειται για παροδίες, ας πούμε, είτε καταστάσεων είτε άλλων έργων, εδώ δεν πρόκειται για μια τέτοια περίπτωση, πρόκειται για μια περίπτωση στην οποία προσπαθεί να αποτίσει έναν φόρο τιμής σε αυτόν τον μοναχό με τον οποίο συνδέθηκε τόσο έντονα. Και άμα παρατηρήσετε κάποιες λεπτομέρειες στην συγκεκριμένη απεικόνηση, όπως για παράδειγμα το γεγονός ότι στο δάχτυλο του, δεν πειράζει, του Γκούφι βλέπουμε... Στο δάχτυλο του Γκούφι βλέπουμε ότι είναι σκισμένη η κάλτσα και εξέχει το δάχτυλο. Δεν είναι για να τον διακομωδήσει, αλλά είναι ακριβής απεικόνιση του πώς ήταν ντυμένος ο συγκεκριμένος μοναχός. Ότι, και προσθέτει τώρα ότι είχε σκισμένα ρούχα γιατί ήταν φτωχός και του βγαίνει το δάχτυλο από την κάλτσα, ας πούμε. Μπορείς να πάρεις αυτό που πλένει τα πιάτα. Να το αυτό.
Tu spiega, sono le sue posizioni che lui aveva sempre.
Ή για παράδειγμα εδώ στη σκηνή που πλένει τα πιάτα, που πλένει το ποτήρι, ήταν χαρακτηριστική η κίνηση του συγκεκριμένου πάτερ που σήκωνε το μανίκι από το ράσο που φορούσε για να πλύνει, ή σε άλλη σκηνή του πώς τοποθετούσε τα χέρια στη μέση καθώς μιλούσε. Προσπάθησε να τον απεικονίσει όσο πιο πιστά γίνεται. Και αυτό που είπε στην αρχή και δεν πρόλαβα να μεταφράσω είναι ότι λόγω του ότι ήταν φτωχός και δεν είχε ρούχα, πολύ συχνά όταν θα πήγαιναν να τον συναντήσουν, θα του παίρνανε και θα του πηγαίναν κάποια ρούχα, κάποιο μπουφάν για το χειμώνα και ούτω καθεξής.
Lui, per esempio, mi ha insegnato, era un grande cuoco, cucinava il pesce come non ho mai visto cucinare da nessuno. E perché? Perché lui da giovane era alla Meghisti Lavra, era entrato da ragazzino, come tutti i monaci. E lui era stato aiuto cuoco e poi era diventato cuoco prima di andare a essere l'eremita.
Επίσης, ήταν εξαιρετικός μάγειρας. Όταν είχε μπει στην μονή, στην Μεγίστη Λαύρα, πριν φτάσει στο σημείο να διοικεί το μοναστήρι της Κύρα Παναγιάς, είχε ξεκινήσει ως νεαρός τότε μοναχός, βοηθός μάγειρα. Και στη συνέχεια εξελίχθηκε και σε κανονικό μάγειρα και είχε μάθει πάρα πολύ καλά να μαγειρεύει. Αναφέρει χαρακτηριστικά ότι δεν έχει φάει πιο νόστιμο ψάρι από το πώς το μαγείρευε ο Πάτερ Νεκτάριος.
Ma poi mi ha insegnato, oltre alla pazienza, oltre alla bontà della persona, mi ha insegnato, per uno che va a fare camping, che viaggia nelle isole, mi ha insegnato ad accendere i fuochi con piccoli legni. Lui non usava mai la legna grossa, lui accendeva dei fuochi incredibili per cucinare, ma con dei piccoli, noi li chiamavamo i legnetti, non so, un diminutivo di legno. Lui sapeva e teneva il fuoco sempre acceso, aggiungendo poca legna, pochissima legna, non faceva mai i fuochi. E questa era la sua arte di cucinare il pesce.
Και εκτός από πολλά άλλα πράγματα τα οποία του μετέφερε, όπως θέματα που αφορούν την πνευματικότητα, την υπομονή και ούτω καθεξής, του έμαθε και πράγματα τα οποία είναι χρήσιμα για ανθρώπους όπως ο ίδιος που πολύ συχνά έκαναν ελεύθερο κάμπινγκ, όπως για παράδειγμα το πώς να ανάβουν φωτιά με μικρά ξυλάκια. Δεν χρησιμοποιούσε ποτέ μεγάλα ξύλα για το μαγείρεμα, πάντα χρησιμοποιούσε για να ανάψει μεγάλες κατά τα άλλα φωτιές, μικρά ξυλάκια. Και αυτό ήταν και ένα από τα μυστικά της μαγειρικής του, γιατί με αυτή τη φωτιά που άναβε έψινε και αυτά τα πολύ νόστιμα ψάρια στα οποία αναφερθήκαμε πριν.
Adesso concludiamo questo episodio, no, perché io voglio parlare di cose. No, però mi fai ricordare tante cose che mi ricordi troppo. Per me è troppo importante questa storia. Però Terma, tora teliosa na milasame sto comics. Aspetta calidad.
Pensi che queste sono migliori cose?
Volete ancora? Allora, io facevo pesca subacquea.
Ψαροτούφικο.
E prendevo pesci, rofos, sargos, e lo portavo a lui sempre, perché lui era un grande magiras, veramente. E lui forse mi amava proprio per il pesce che gli portavo, perché i pescatori di Alonissos, loro quando andavano a visitarlo, gli portavano sempre il pesce, ma gli portavano il pesce piccolo, le vopas, le sartes, le sardelle e le cose. Io quando arrivavo io a trovarlo, gli portavo dei pesci magari di 5-6 kg e mangiavamo per dei giorni.
Αυτό που προσθέτει είναι επίσης ότι...
No, vabbè.
Τα μισά τα λες στα ελληνικά, ούτως ή άλλως. Του πήγαινε, λοιπόν, επειδή έκανε ψαροντούφεκο, του πήγαινε συχνά ψάρια για να τα μαγειρεύει και τρώγανε όλοι μαζί, πολύ συχνά και με άλλους επισκέπτες του μοναστηριού. Και ίσως αυτός είναι και ένας από τους λόγους που τον αγαπούσε πολύ και ο Πάτερ Νεκτάριος, γιατί οι άλλοι ψαράδες της Σαλονίσου του πηγαίναν μικρά ψαράκια, σαρδέλες, γάβρους, δεν ξέρω, ναι, γόπες, ναι. Ενώ εκείνος του πήγαινε κάτι ροφούς 5 και 6 κιλών που φτάναν για να φάνε 10-15 άτομα, οπότε ήτανε...
Lui mi amava molto e mi voleva bene e non so se mi voleva bene per il pesce che gli portavo o perché ero simpatico, ma lui amava tutti perché tutti gli ospiti che arrivavano lui li accoglieva, tutti. E c'è un particolare del psomì, perché Pater Nectarius aveva il forno e il coso, faceva un psomì grosso così una volta ogni 15 giorni, no? Ecco. Però dopo 15 giorni lo psomì che rimaneva era talmente duro e talmente forte che era acido anche ed era difficile da mangiare. Beh, raccontagli questo.
Εκτός από το θέμα των ψαριών, αναφέρεται και στο ψωμί, το οποίο έφτιαχνε ο ίδιος ο Πάτερ Νεκτάριος. Έκανε ένα μεγάλο ταψί γεμάτο με ψωμί, το οποίο το έφτιαχνε κάθε 15 μέρες. Το πρόβλημα είναι ότι μετά από 15 μέρες το ψωμί που είχε περισσέψει είχε σκληρύνει τόσο πολύ, είχε μπαγιατέψει, οπότε... Δεν με τα λαβιά.
Ma poi c'è anche la cosa del crashing. No, allora io avevo imparato, quando andavo a trovarlo, a visitarlo, io andavo ad Alonisos e compravo 3-4 kg del psomì greco normale, con 1 chilo, no? E lui impazziva per questo psomì perché lui non aveva possibilità, lui era obbligato a stare lì. Ecco questo.
Και εκτός από τα ψάρια που του έφερνε και γι' αυτό τον συμπαθούσε πολύ, επίσης κάθε τόσο του πήγαινε και ψωμί από το φούρνο, δεν ξέρω, της Σαλονίσου ή από οπουδήποτε το προμηθευόταν, το οποίο του άρεσε πάρα πολύ γιατί όντας μόνιμα στο μοναστήρι δεν είχε επαφή με τον έξω κόσμο για να τρώει ψωμί από το φούρνο, έτρωγε μόνο αυτό που έφτιαχνε ο ίδιος. Οπότε ήταν και αυτό κάτι που εκτιμούσε πάρα πολύ ο Πάτερ Νεκτάριος.
Passato 3/4 della loro vita in questi posti solitari, in queste piccole isole, perché i monasteri del tipo La Lavra, loro sono proprietari di un'isola là, un'isola, e però dovevano mandare, e avevano poche, in quel periodo, negli anni 70-80, non avevano, perché c'era la cortina di ferro, c'era ancora il comunismo in Russia, per cui non avevano molti monaci da mandare, e per cui questi vivevano da soli durante tutto l'inverno, non vedevano nessuno.
Και κλείνοντας αυτό το κομμάτι της συζήτησης για να περάσουμε και στις ερωτήσεις σας, αυτό που λέει είναι ότι γενικά οφείλουμε αναγνώριση σε αυτούς τους ανθρώπους, άμα σκεφτούμε ειδικά τα παλιότερα χρόνια που ήταν ακόμα πιο δύσκολα. Γιατί στο Άγιο Όρος υπάρχουν πολλές μονές οι οποίες είναι σε απομονωμένα νησάκια διάσπαρτα στην γύρω περιοχή. Και αυτοί οι άνθρωποι μπορεί να έμεναν για πάρα πολύ καιρό, πάρα πολλές εβδομάδες ή και μήνες μόνοι τους, ολομόναχοι, για να κρατάνε το μοναστήρι και χωρίς να βλέπουν άνθρωπο. Και να περνάνε όλο το χειμώνα σε συνθήκες τέτοιες, όπως ένα απομονωμένο νησί κάπου εντελώς μόνοι. Το οποίο...
Dovete essere riconoscenti perché l'ortodossia salverà il mondo, perché adesso in Italia τίποτα είναι όλο μόνο fassaria. E allora questi monaci del Monte Athos e l'Ecclesia in Elada è molto importante che rimanga l'ortodossia. Dopo, questo dai, concludiamo.
Και κάνοντας έναν ύμνο στην ελληνική εκκλησία και την Ορθοδοξία, κλείνουμε αυτό το κομμάτι της συζήτησης και περνάμε στις ερωτήσεις του κοινού. Όποιος θέλει μπορεί να σηκώσει το χέρι του για να του περάσουμε μικρόφωνο και να απευθύνει. απευθύνει κάποιο ερώτημα στον Μάσιμο Ντεβίτα.
Το έχει ξανακάνει και με άλλους ανθρώπους και χαρακτήρες που έχει ο ίδιος προσωπικά βιώματα.
Allora, lui chiede che questa cosa che hai fatto in questa storia, il fatto che hai preso una persona reale e l'hai trasformato l'hai fatto anche con in altre storie, con altri personaggi, altre persone.
Sì, è successo. Adesso non ricordo quanti, però è sempre interessante per un appassionato, è sempre interessante trovare cioè mischiare questi personaggi. Io ho sempre lavorato per Disney, la mia professione è sempre Disney, però attraverso i personaggi di Disney puoi ritrovare certi caratteri dell'umanità normale, questo che penso.
Ναι, το έχει ξανακάνει. Αναφέρει ότι αυτή τη στιγμή δεν μπορεί να θυμηθεί ακριβώς και να αναφερθεί σε συγκεκριμένες ιστορίες και συγκεκριμένους χαρακτήρες, αλλά αυτό που θέλει να επισημάνει ως ενδιαφέρον είναι το γεγονός ότι ο ίδιος δούλευε πάντα για την Disney. Δεν έχει δουλέψει με άλλους ήρωες κόμιξ, δεν έχει κάνει προσωπικές ιστορίες εκτός Disney κτλ. Επομένως, ήταν πάντα πολύ ενδιαφέρον και ένας τρόπος να του συντηρεί και το ενδιαφέρον να σχεδιάζει αυτές τις ιστορίες, να αναμειγνύει πραγματικά γεγονότα και πραγματικά πρόσωπα σε ιστορίες με φανταστικούς χαρακτήρες, πόσο μάλλον ανθρωπόμορφους, ζωόμορφους μάλλον, όπως αυτή της Disney.
Allora, ecco, adesso parliamo di comics un momento. Se avete pazienza, io sono abbastanza incazzato sul fatto che il lavoro di quelli che fanno il comics è considerata la nona arte. Diglielo.
Sei incazzato?
Sì, sono incazzato con questa cosa. Adesso gli dimostro. No, non dire incazzato. Ad ogni modo, è considerata la nona arte perché, non so se lo sapete, la prima arte è architettura e musichina, sono le due prime. Poi c'è la pittura e la scultura, no? Poi c'è la quinta, è la poesia. Poi la sesta è la danza. La danza classica. La settima mi mettono il cinema, no? E noi siamo la nona. No, perché sia il comic che il cinema raccontano storie. Noi che facciamo il comic raccontiamo storie, però noi raccontiamo le storie attraverso il disegno e il testo, no? E questa è una tecnica che però non usiamo la tecnologia. Il cinema usa tecnologia, per cui è il cinema che deve andare al nono posto e noi che facciamo il comics andiamo al settimo.
8? Qual è?
8 è la televisione.
Επίσης, αυτό που λέει είναι για ό,τι αφορά τα κόμιξ, ότι τον ενοχλεί το γεγονός ότι θεωρούνται η ένατη τέχνη, γιατί ξεκίνησε να παριθμεί όλες τις τέχνες, από την πρώτη που είναι η αρχιτεκτονική, τη δεύτερη που είναι η μουσική, η τρίτη, αν θυμάμαι καλά, είναι η λογοτεχνία, τρίτη, la letteratura, terza.
No, non è la letteratura, i primi sono architettura e musica.
Sì, dopo terza.
Il secondo è pittura, scultura.
Ok, η ζωγραφική, η γλυπτική, ο χορός, la danza.
La quarta è la poesia. Voi avete Esiodo, Omero, cazzo, i grandi poeti, la poesia, la quinta. La sesta, addiamo pure la danza.
Ναι, η έκτη που είναι ο χορός και μετά φτάνουμε στην έβδομη που είναι ο κινηματογράφος και η όγδοη που είναι η τηλεόραση. Από τον κινηματογράφο και μετά αναφέρονται σε τέχνες οι οποίες χρησιμοποιούν και τεχνικά μέσα και ένατη μετά είναι η τέχνη των κόμιξ, η οποία στον πυρήνα της δεν αξιοποιεί τεχνικά μέσα, είναι σχέδιο, ουσιαστικά εικονογράφηση και κείμενο, κάτι πιο κοντά, κάτι ανάμεσα στη ζωγραφική και την λογοτεχνία. Επομένως, θα έπρεπε να είναι αυτή στη θέση της 7ης και οι άλλες να πάνε πιο μετά.
Emoziona di più perché colpisce gli appassionati. Insomma, prova a spiegare questa cosa.
Εμείς χρησιμοποιούμε το μολύβι, τη γόμα, την πένα και ίσως αυτός είναι και ο λόγος που μπορεί η τέχνη μας να προσεγγίζει και να δημιουργεί συναισθήματα σε τόσο πολύ κόσμο. Αν υπάρχει κάποιος άλλος που θα ήθελε να ρωτήσει κάτι, ας ξεκινήσει η κοπέλα και μετά...
Ciao, sono italiana. Parlerò in italiano perché non conosco abbastanza bene il greco. Però, allora, concordo enormemente su questa cosa che ha appena detto. E proprio spontaneamente, io mi sono interessata da qualche anno, insomma, al mondo dei fumetti. Sto scrivendo una tesi su questo e mi piacerebbe in futuro sia scrivere che disegnare, che magari entrare nel mondo della critica, del fumetto, insomma scrivere degli articoli. Sì, entrare in questo mondo. Alla luce della situazione attuale, appunto, e alla luce di questa subordinazione, che cosa consiglierebbe a chi vuole entrare, anche in maniera collaterale, esatto, in questo mondo?
Η κοπέλα, από ό,τι καταλάβατε, μίλησε στα Ιταλικά, οπότε η ερώτησή της ήταν ότι δεδομένου ότι ασχολείται με τα κόμιξ και θέλει να γράφει τώρα την πτυχιακή της, αν κατάλαβα σωστά, πάνω στα κόμιξ και θα ήθελε να ασχοληθεί με το αντικείμενο τόσο ως δημιουργός, όσο και ως κριτικός κόμιξ. Η ερώτηση που απευθύνει στον Μάσιμο είναι ότι δεδομένης της κατάστασης στη συγκεκριμένη μορφή τέχνης και ευρύτερα θα έλεγα, προσθέτω εγώ, στα βιβλία γενικότερα η κρίση που υπάρχει αναγνωστική, ποια θα ήταν η συμβουλή του για έναν νέο ο οποίος αυτή τη στιγμή σε μια φάση που τα κόμιξ μπορεί να βρίσκονται σε καθοδική πορεία θέλει να ασχοληθεί με αυτό το αντικείμενο.
Ecco, io a questa ragazza devo essere cattivo. Io gli consiglierei di prendere un altro mestiere perché il comics sta finendo, perché la tecnologia ci sta soffocando. Adesso ci sono dei programmi nei tablet che ti permettono di disegnare una tavola di comics, magari disegnata malissimo, e te la correggono e te la fanno diventare perfetta. Per cui è finito il tempo della creatività.
Θα αναγκαστώ να γίνω κακός, λέει ο Μάσιμο, ξεκινώντας την απάντησή του, και να πω στην κοπέλα ότι η συμβουλή μου θα ήταν να διαλέξει κάτι άλλο να κάνει στη ζωή της, δεδομένου ότι τα κόμιξ σιγά-σιγά τελειώνουν. Αυτή τη στιγμή έχει μπει αρκετή τεχνολογία επίσης στο δημιουργικό κομμάτι, κάτι που τον βρίσκει αντίθετο. Υπάρχουν ακόμα και εφαρμογές οι οποίες μπορεί να σου δώσουν να τους δώσεις μάλλον μια κακοσχεδιασμένη σελίδα και να την διορθώσουν και να την φτιάξουν, λες και την έχεις φτιάξει τέλεια.
Alla ragazza voglio dire ancora, se voi vedete cos'è la intelligenza artificiale, ho visto il mese scorso un filmato dove ci sono degli attori famosissimi, tipo Harrison Ford, Leonardo DiCaprio, no? Che sono loro della loro età vecchia e di fianco abbracciano, creati dall'intelligenza sta vicino e che lui abbraccia è una cosa che è morta già in partenza, cioè è finito il momento della creazione. Noi siamo destinati tutti a diventare degli avatar, di noi stessi. Questo guarda che è forte questo, è un concetto forte.
Αναφέρεται, συνεχίζοντας την συζήτηση κυρίως για την τεχνητή νοημοσύνη, φέρνει σαν παράδειγμα ένα βίντεο που είδε πρόσφατα, όπου διάφοροι δημοφιλείς ηθοποιοί, όπως ο Χάρισον Φόρντ και ο Λεωνάρντο Ντικάπριο, ήταν στη σημερινή τους εμφάνιση, μαζί με την νεανική τους εκδοχή, φτιαγμένη μέσω τεχνητής νοημοσύνης, το Avatar, όπως είναι ευρέως γνωστό σαν αναφορά. Και αυτό που έβλεπε στην ουσία είναι ότι ήταν όλοι χαρούμενοι με αυτό που συνέβαινε και κάπως νιώθει ότι η δημιουργικότητα σταδιακά στον σύγχρονο κόσμο αρχίζει να σβήνει και ότι είμαστε όλοι προορισμένοι να γίνουμε Avatar. Sì, επόμενη ερώτηση.
Και τα έκανε και δημοσιευθήκανε ή ήταν έργα τα οποία του τα παρήγγειλε ο εκδότης και πόσο περίπου χρονικό διάστημα του πήρε κάτι τέτοιο να το ολοκληρώσει από την αρχή που το συνέλαβε σαν ιδέα μέχρι και που το ολοκλήρωσε?
Erano storie che hai creato tu o te l'hanno chiesto dalla redazione? Quando ti ha messo a completare queste storie? Quanto tempo?
Devo sapere. No, le storie ci sono i soggettisti, però spiegagli e raccontagli che io non mi accontento, forse è una cosa di egoismo, però io non mi accontento del soggetto scritto, anche quella della pietra zodiacale, ho trasformato il soggetto.
L'abbiamo detto anche noi con Giorgio che lo fai nella tua carriera, che cambi i soggetti, l'abbiamo già notato. Ξεκινάει λέγοντας ότι γενικά ο ίδιος ήταν κατά βάση σχεδιαστής, επομένως λάμβανε σενάρια άλλων καλλιτεχνών σεναριογράφων και μετά αναλάμβανε το σχέδιό τους. Οπότε, σε ό,τι αφορά την δημιουργία αυτών των ιστοριών, ήταν δημιουργίες που ήρθαν έτοιμες από τους αντίστοιχους σεναριογράφους. Ωστόσο, όπως λέγαμε και νωρίτερα με τον Γιώργο στην εισαγωγή μας, ότι ο ίδιος απολάμβανε να αλλάζει και να συνδημιουργεί τα σενάρια τα οποία λάμβανε, διαμορφώνοντας τελικά κάτι πολύ διαφορετικό και εν τέλει πολύ πιο προσωπικό από την αρχική ιστορία.
Allora, adesso io vorrei raccontare, quando ero bambino piccolo, io ero grande appassionato di comics, perché naturalmente avevo anche mio papà.
Sì, anche questo l'abbiamo detto.
E leggevo le storie di comics, ero grande appassionato e mi accorgevo che certe storie mi interessavano e certe altre no, non le leggevo.
Ο ίδιος από μικρό παιδί απολάμβανε να διαβάζει κόμιξ, όπως αναφέραμε και νωρίτερα, είχε και τον πατέρα του, ο οποίος ήταν δημιουργός κόμιξ κτλ. Και αυτό που παρατηρούσε από πιτσιρικάς είναι το γεγονός ότι κάποιες ιστορίες που διάβαζε τον τραβούσαν και κάποιες όχι. Οπότε ήθελα να καταλάβει τι είναι αυτό που τον κάνει σε κάποιες ιστορίες να στέκεται περισσότερο και σε άλλες όχι τόσο.
Allora, secondo me, cos'è che fa in modo che una storia è bella da leggere e un'altra storia invece non ti piace? E poi ho scoperto, ho capito che è l'emozione, cioè è l'emozione, quando tu disegni qualcosa e provi un'emozione, tu mentre la fai, anche il lettore proverà la stessa emozione perché tu, senza volerlo, gli hai messo dentro la tua emozione. Questo è importante, che gli avatar non possono fare. No,
questa sarà l'ultima parola perché non
abbiamo. Gli avatar non possono fare questo. Noi possiamo mettere l'emozione.
Αυτό που λέει είναι ότι κατέληξε, όσο σκεφτόταν τι ήταν αυτό και ειδικά όταν ήταν και ο ίδιος δημιουργός κόμιξ, συνειδητοποίησε ότι αυτό που διαφοροποιεί τις ιστορίες μεταξύ τους είναι το συναίσθημα. Το συναίσθημα το οποίο βιώνει ο δημιουργός μιας ιστορίας την ώρα που την γράφει ή την σχεδιάζει, που πρακτικά εκεί παίρνει ζωή η ίδια ιστορία, όταν το κάνει με συναίσθημα, όταν βιώνει την ιστορία που εικονογραφεί, αυτό το συναίσθημα το εκλαμβάνει μετά και ο αναγνώστης, του περνάει μέσα από την τελική σχεδιασμένη σελίδα. Και κλείνοντας, γιατί δυστυχώς δεν έχουμε άλλο χρόνο για περισσότερες ερωτήσεις, καταλήγει λέγοντας ότι αυτό είναι κάτι που τα avatar δεν θα μπορέσουν να κάνουν ποτέ. Ευχαριστούμε πολύ για την παρουσία σας. Όσοι θέλετε, μπορείτε να έρθετε και αύριο στο workshop του Massimo De Vita 8 με 9 το βράδυ, που θα έχουμε την ευκαιρία να δώσουμε λίγο παραπάνω χρόνο και σε κάποιες ερωτήσεις που ενδεχομένως δεν μπορέσατε να κάνετε. Ευχαριστούμε πολύ.